Good morning, everyone. I just want to take a minute to say hello, and we're going to give it just another minute or two, Nate, before we get started to make sure everyone who wants to get logged in has a minute to do so. It's just now 12 noon, so we'll give it just another minute or two. Welcome, everyone.
You're welcome. Familiar names for those that I don't think you guys can all see the names of attendees, but many old friends and new friends. Hello, hello.
That's wonderful. A mix of new and old. And while we give it a minute here, I will just start with a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have thoughts, questions, please feel free to type them down in the chat box and the Q&A. I'll be monitoring both. If it seems like it makes sense, Dr. Bergman is open to us inserting a question or two. If I come on and interrupt Dr. Nate, you'll know why. It means it's something pretty good that we should be talking about. But we may hold questions till the end if it makes sense. So we'll kind of just take it as we go here. I still see people logging on. Let's give it just another minute here. Got a good group today, which is wonderful. I don't know where everybody's from, but in Cleveland, it's too cold to be out and about doing other things. So you might as well log on and listen today, right?
I see some people from Florida. I see mostly Clevelanders. I see some West Virginia. I see some, outside Cleveland, but otherwise in, like Central Ohio, West Ohio. So hello, hello. Hi, Harry. Hi, June.
Oh, our number keeps climbing here. I keep thinking we're about to start, but then I see a few more coming in. I think we will, in light of time, I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm sorry, I started talking and didn't even introduce myself. I'm Lindsay Scott with the Kemper Cognitive Wellness Group. I'm the Director of Marketing, and we are so grateful to have you joining us today for our topic, Memory Loss is Preventable, and why the best time to invest in your brain health is now. It sounds like Dr. Nate does not need much of an introduction because you know a lot of these friends on here today. But for those of you that are new, Dr. Nate Bergman is our Chief Scientific Wellness Officer here at the Kemper Cognitive Wellness Center located in Rocky River, Ohio. But happy we can join with folks all over the country today, thanks to Zoom. Dr. Bergman has previously, before joining Kemper, co-developed the program for brain health at the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine. He was also chosen by Dr. Dale Bredesen, which is likely a name many of you are familiar with, to be a part of the Bredesen Brain Board, which is a group of 20 clinicians who specialize and dedicate their life's work really to brain health and getting in front of cognitive impairment and seeing what we can do to fight against this and push back and live a good life despite a diagnosis. So with that, Dr. Bergman, I'm going to hand it over to you. And like I said, I'll be here in the background. So if there's questions, something we need to address, feel free to type it below and I will get the information to Dr. Nate. There you go. Nate, you are muted.
Yep, you can see the screen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. I think this will be to some degree a review for many of us, but if we're having memory problems, sometimes review is not the worst thing. Sometimes we'll review. I had some teachers who say review is the main thing. Review is the main thing. Okay, so I think some people on here are already experiencing, or in the rabbit hole or down the rabbit hole with memory, and the name of the game overall is doing things as early as possible. I call it, emptying the chamber early, especially if Alzheimer's or something like that is the reason you're on here, and it runs in the family, or you have information that you have mild cognitive impairment or full-blown Alzheimer's dementia, right? But a lot of times what we hear is people in their 40s, it's now in their 30s, 40s, 50s, certainly 60s, 70s, usually starts to happen late 40s, 50s for most people, and then there's a problem. You go to a primary care doctor, maybe a specialist, and somebody says, well, you're just getting older. it's normal. And if you have somebody that you cared about, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, or grandparents even sometimes, where you witnessed or watched neurodegeneration, right, Alzheimer's and other form of dementia, take someone's mind and their personality and just take them down, then for some of us, every time they can't remember a word, they think, oh my God, I'm getting Alzheimer's, like my, whoever it is, like the dad or brother, sister, etc. And so a lot of people just sort of just wait because they believe there's nothing they can do. And the main thing, right, the main thing to understand, and those of you that are already connected with us, like there's a lot to do, right? It's not necessarily easy. It's not a cure, but there are a ton of things to do, and most people in our experience have either a little bit or a great degree of improvement, right? And so we want to talk to you about some of those findings. And for those of you that haven't heard us talk, this is an important reference point for me. This little picture that you're seeing in front of you here. And I know it's complicated, but let me make it not complicated. So what you're seeing at the top, like this line, I want to make sure you guys can see. Lindsay, can you see that cursor? Can you see my pointing there? Yeah. You're muted too, but so this line here, from the time we're about 30 years old, 20, 27, 28, 30 years old, something like that, our physical body, including our brain, the physical part of our brain, is about is big and healthy and peak as it's going to be, unless there's been injuries, etc. But it's still, and over time, as we get older, right? As we get older, as we move this way on this chart, as we get older, yeah, just like joints change and skin changes and things change, like the brain changes, right? It changes, but it doesn't have to be dire, it doesn't have to be horrible, but it is a little harder to learn new material and to learn things quickly and to hold on to things, but maybe to remember some names. So a certain amount of that is normal aging. The problem is with Alzheimer's, and we really need to start thinking about Alzheimer's and probably other dementias as well as like cancer or like heart disease, that it doesn't just come from out of nowhere, typically. Occasionally it does, but vast majority of times, it's a slow moving thing, right? And so detection, just like with cancer, earlier detection is better, right? Because the time, right? So people usually have 3, 4, 5, 10. The changes are probably happening 10 plus, maybe even 30 years ahead. But cognitive symptoms, so mood changes, a little more frustrated learning new things, harder to make and form new memories, repeating things, like those kinds of changes should not be ignored, right? They just shouldn't. If people are aware of them. My experience with people is they'll wait and they wait and they wait and they wait until they get some kind of diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment. That's MCI, is mild cognitive impairment, which anybody, and I know there's some of you on this call that has MCI, anybody that has an MCI knows it's kind of a big deal. There's usually quite a bit of brain changes by the time you get to mild cognitive impairment. Now you can, have milder cognitive impairment, and dementia is really cognitive impairment. So what is mild cognitive impairment? It means you take a test and you score abnormal on the test. So it's a measurable form of cognitive impairment. And some of the tests are pretty simple. And then dementia is cognitive impairment, usually that's gotten so bad, so brain function's gotten bad enough where someone can't do all of the aspects of their life independently. That might start with being able to do like computer-based bill paying or something like that, as they might have been able to do in the past, and might, as it develops into more significant, lack of being able to drive or manage my own just meal preparation, household, to the point where for some people, they can't, if you've seen this, what I'm talking about, they can't get dressed on their own, they get out of bed. And in very, very advanced stages, it gets, people can't move and they start to get incontinent. And those are the very advanced stages. But the idea here is to avoid the advanced stages when possible, right? And why is that, right? The reason for that is because the earlier that we intervene, similar to heart disease, etc., even though it's not the way our system is set up, our health, for the vast majority of it, our healthcare system is not particularly set up for that right now, but we typically get better results, these sort of more remarkable results when people are doing something sooner, right? So the effective treatments tend to be more remarkable the earlier they're employed, right? Now, I want to give you, this might be new for some of you, haven't seen us talk in a little while, but this may be, hopefully this is starting to be a little bit of repetition for people, so they kind of burn this into their brain, so to speak, no pun intended. But this is not out of the literature. This is from Nate Bergman, right? And the work we're doing here at Temper Cognitive Wellness. What are we seeing that seem to get the results the most consistently, that don't get into highly precise, highly personalized medicine? These are things that sort of tend to work for most people, not everybody, but most people. When you in the more combinations of these things that we can do, the better people on average tend to do. The most important thing, and this, like, I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on this, but we might be actually retooling a lot of what we do to start to drive this point home, is to activate purpose. If someone is brought here by a spouse or by their child, right, because it fixed dad or fixed my wife or fixed that kind of, like, the kinds of things we're talking about, this precision approach that's personalized, right? It really, somebody's got to be invested themselves. They had to bring their own life, that joie de vivre, that life force into it. And because it's a battle, right? Like we all know, just getting up and getting dressed and going into whatever it is that we have to do, for many of us, it's a battle every single day. And so if we're struggling with cognitive issues, it's no different than, to some degree, it's no different than battling cancer or heart disease or an autoimmune condition. There are things that we need to do to win the day, right? And that requires purpose, commitment, and accountability, right? Whether it's to yourself or to someone you're paying for, accountability, et cetera. And it's a lot of what we end up doing, right? Is just helping people stay focused. And I just can't tell you the amount of times where I've seen that this is important, right? Something happens in life, and this is their cognitive health is important to them, and they know it's important for them to be able to do the other things, to either stay at work or to stay involved in their family life. But something happens, and we allow that to knock us off course. And I don't see it for 3-6 months. And then, because time is brain, especially as we get further out on that kind of brain loss chart, it's like, why did we talk like 2 months or 3 months? Well, this and that. And people sort of treat it like it's not that big of a deal, or we have a lot of time. And I just don't. I've learned from practical experience and also from mentors that time is brain, essentially. So what can you do? Rescuing brain energy for many people. Again, it's not everybody, but it's many people. It's definitely more than half. It's probably closer to about 75, 80%. When we change dietary, we change the diet towards something that's more ketogenic, more high fat, we start to resuscitate brain energy. It can be like, sometimes we'll see results like in 2 weeks. I'll show you a case where we had a nice result. But then we have case after case after case where it's not a cure, but it definitely improves people's ability to stay sharp and to remember names and to follow conversations. And I mean, it's remarkable. Exercise, obviously, like, that's nothing new, but it's the combination of the right kinds of exercise, the brain with the body. Our body contains our brain. Our brain is in our body. Right? You'll hear me say that from time to time. And so we got to work with the whole body, right? Because the whole body influences the brain, and vice versa. It's kind of interesting like that. Fixing sleep issues, which we'll talk about. Dental issues, turns out periodontal swelling, inflammation, infections has a bigger role than we suspected. So that's a focus. Practical technologies. We'll talk a little bit about practical technologies. Some of you are using things like lights on your head, which we call photobiomodulation. Some of you have done or continue to do cranial stimulation with electrical stimulation that can be targeted based on locating things with some technologies that we have in EEG brain map technology. And sometimes they're imprecise. They just sort of hit general areas, which is maybe good too. But I think of technology more as, instead of the solution, I don't think of any of these as a single solution. The new thinking is to do all of these things, or as many of these things, at the same time, right? And then one of the things that we mentioned before, we sort of hinted at before, that's really important, is the brain craves newness, right? Review is important, but there's also a need to learn and grow. Like that's how our nervous systems and our biology are constructed at a fundamental level. And so if we get to a point in life, and we all know, when that is for individuals, either in ourselves or in our surroundings, that if we don't sort of continue to grow and learn and push, and I don't mean necessarily push weight and earn more money, and I'm talking about in any fashion, right? You'll hear people say learn a language or learn a new instrument or learn new technology, but there's also spiritual growth and development. Many, many ways to grow. There's growing in depths in relationship with other people, which turns out has a lot of healing property itself, which we'll talk about as well. So ongoing learning and growth. Again, these things might seem patently obvious, but when you see how they work in real life and you start to see the synergies in real life, they have more meaning. So this is really like something to think about. And then of course, like looking for drivers of root causes of dementia, other than it runs in my family. And sometimes it largely is about this runs in the family. And we have plenty of people that we see like that. All right. So we're continuing on here. Oh, my slide is not advancing. Here we go. If people just kind of let things go the way they go and don't do anything, I've been party to this many, many times. The diagnosis of Alzheimer's, there's really nothing you can do. Get your affairs in order. There's a couple of medicines that may impact things a little bit, typically not. And it's just that's the long goodbye. Like that just is not, and this is still more or less going on. And this is still basically the standard of care, and really nothing could be further from the truth, right? Where people say, well, what about medicines, the medications that are new? I think we've done a webinar on medications last year. There's a couple of other medicines since we did the one on aducanumab or Aduhelm that got sort of tacit approval last year by FDA. And what are these medicines? They're taking, these are Alzheimer's based medicines that are taking out a certain kind of plaque that builds up in the brain. And they've studied these things for a long time, and in many cases made no difference whatsoever. And right now, the best medicines at the highest doses make the slope of people getting worse a little less worse. Okay, I mean, it's a good start. It's a good start, and I am kind of optimistic that we'll have medications. But what we're hoping to do is find places to work with, if it's not ourselves, to combine the kinds of things that we do with lifestyle, personalized medicine, functional medicine, with medications, and allow people to be sort of on the lowest dose possible, so that they can minimize side effects and have the best life, right? And have the best life. And so I think it's going to be these combinations that are going to be kind of the best for us in the end. And I might be a minority in that regard. I think a lot of people are not so excited about medications. I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but still a lot of work. And if people have questions specifically about the medications, we theoretically can talk about those. But the newer ideas, and I think many of you on the webinar here today already know quite a bit about some of these newer approaches, but it's really, the newer approaches really are more speaking to all of the different kinds of causes, right? Even the news last summer about the amyloid hypothesis, and maybe some of you heard about that, and that was the dominant hypothesis, and it brought a lot of bias into research, and maybe there was some falsification of aspects of some slide data that a lot of funding and research since 2006 has been stacked on top of. Yeah, well, because there are a lot of other drivers and known associations and causes, right, of Alzheimer's. And so what we try to do is identify as many of those causes as possible. And that leads to what's called multi-domain or multi-component therapy. So meaning if there are 5 problems or 10 problems or 15 problems that we can identify, we have to sort of fix all of those problems and not just say there's going to be one medicine that's going to fix it, right? There's several things that can tear apart a brain, and that conversely can kind of put things back together again, right? We don't have perfect tests for all of these things, and it can get tricky. But in general, that's where, and there's 3 or 4 big international trials that are available in English. Again, there might be things going on in Korea and China that we're unaware of, Japan, etc. but at least in the English-speaking kind of Western world, there are four big trials that are ongoing, have been published, publishing for the last close to 10 years, even longer in some cases. MAPT, PREDIVA, Finger trial. United States is launching their prevention trial. So, what are some of these so-called dementogens? This is a limited list. I think it's worth it if you're really interested in this dementogen topic. If you read Dale Bredesen's The End of Alzheimer's, I think that's got some useful information. His hypothesis is that there's about 39, that's a growing list, 39, maybe somewhere in the number 50 drivers of cognitive decline. And again, it's a medical hypothesis. So we're working with it. It's not a proven fact. So people run around like it's a proven fact. But just look at these, low oxygen and wrong kind of nutrition, sleep issues in general, not just oxygen, stress and blood pressure, weight. I think the new things for people, like I had a guy this morning who's got a lot of cognitive impairment, and he's got type 2 diabetes. And his type 2 diabetes, since he's been working with us, is like really under control. He's off 2 medications. His wife is trying to get him off a 3rd. His blood sugars are under control, and he's slowly seeing improvements. And he's been doing this for about 3 months. And we have to balance it with other things. Like he's got heart disease, and so for him, he told me his doctor is so excited when he's got his blood sugar down into like a mild diabetes, almost pre-diabetes. So not an optimal normal range, just like a pre-diabetes or a diabetes that are like listed as under control from a kind of a mainstream medical approach, if you will, a traditional medical approach. Problem is, if your blood sugars are that high, we still see problems that drive the disease, like in Alzheimer's pathology. We see the changes happening at an accelerated pace just from having high blood sugar and abnormal insulin levels. So, and then it becomes like a concussion, where one concussion, okay, most people can sustain, a mild concussion, but if you get another concussion in the period of time, whether that's 1 week or 3 weeks, kind of depending on what it is, then the risk of further and ongoing brain damage goes way up. And we've seen cases where people get their blood sugar under control, their cognition improves, and then the blood sugar goes back and the cognition starts to get lost again. And each time, like, we don't know how many times that blood sugar can spike and do that kind of brain damage to where it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? So each time we go out, we drink ourselves into a stupor, we eat too much sugar, we're sort of on a bender with processed food. I'm just going to go on the vacation and do it for 2 weeks. And people start to feel those changes in their brain and body, right? The equation starts to change, right? When you combine an approach like we use, which is to try to provide people with data and then sync that to their life, and you do that over time, that's where we see the biggest changes. So we can make massive changes in 3-6 months, right? And then we have to sustain them. Yesterday, I believe I saw a woman who's one of my longest following Alzheimer's prevention people. She's been following with me since 2015, still at the Cleveland Clinic, right at the beginning of my time at the Cleveland Clinic. She's got ApoE4 gene. She was in her late 40s when she saw me, and she was already almost in this mild cognitive impairment stage. She's made consistent changes. She followed up with us maybe 3-4 times a year for several years, and is now at about a twice a year clip. And she's better than she was 7 years ago. And she's in her mid 50s, and she's high risk. She's high risk genetically, and then what runs in her family. And she's made all kinds of changes, but they've been sustainable. So it's been remarkable, right? The other two things that people ask a lot about in terms of dementogens are hormones. There's people on this call that could probably attest to the benefits of hormones. I do not see that hormones improves everybody. What I mean by hormones are things like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, pregnenolone. There's a few. The big ones: estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. To some extent, DHEA and pregnenolone. But hormones, for some people, are amazingly restorative and seem to be a key piece in gluing their brain back together. But it's not everybody. The other thing is the environmental toxicants. So air pollution, we found out recently that in younger people, air pollution might make COVID worse. We know that it's now a driver of Alzheimer's. People live in zip codes where there's higher air pollution. So the indoor environment, right? We're thinking more and more differently about the indoor environment, the air in our indoor environments, and certainly the outdoor environments. We have obviously less control over the outdoor environments, but our indoor environments, there's a lot we can do and advise to make the indoor environment safer, right? So there's this list is sort of always growing, right? Always growing. So in general, what we're talking about, like if we need to say in a nutshell what we're doing, is especially for people that already have a process in place where it's not just normal aging, is we're trying to restore function, right? Because in a situation where someone's at risk or at the beginning of sort of an Alzheimer's process, brain cells are getting tired out, they start to die, and then there's this abnormal buildup of goo inside the cells and in between the cells, so they can't connect. The cells can't connect to each other. And then there's some classic areas that this happens. So and it's just this sort of systemic or systematic downsizing of the brain. And so we're trying to resist that and push back and actually regrow the brain in some cases, or at least bypass some of the areas that are dead or fundamentally injured, and reroute the brain while we continue to address the basic drivers of what's going on, right? We're always looking to add energy to the brain and add, so it's learning, growth, energy in a physical sense, and energy in a figurative sense as well. Right? Okay, people say, what, is there any evidence for this? There is evidence, right? If you go to a doctor and say there's no evidence for this, that is incorrect. They're misinformed. There's not the level of evidence yet that we need to see so that you can go to university hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo Clinic, whatever, wherever you're going, and get this kind of care. But there is evidence in the making, but it's not where we need it to be yet, right? So we were part of this study in the reversal of cognitive decline in 100 patients. We submitted a couple of cases. These were people that really had nice improvements with not even doing that much in some cases. Some of the things we'll talk about here. And then there was a small study that didn't have a control group, so it wasn't randomized, it wasn't controlled. That's this study on the bottom right here with the Dale Bredesen group of a few of our colleagues. It's held in Northern California, and in one clinic, Deborah Gordon's clinic, was in Oregon, and they saw 21 out of 25 people had improvements. These are people with basically mild cognitive impairment. It was remarkable, right? There's nobody that's been improving, even the best drug cases, right? And there's been billions and billions of dollars spent on these looking for medications. The best thing they've seen is people doing less worse, like meaning the decline is not as fast as those that are not on these medicines. These are people 21 out of 25 improved. Now, you could argue, oh, there wasn't a control group and it wasn't a well-designed study. Okay, so we're trying to recapitulate that with a control group, and we will be a site for that. And that should be coming fairly soon. We've been working on it for like a year and a half. It's starting to come together. There's still some loose ends to tie up, but there's a website you can go and kind of check out. It's a pretty rough website at this point, but it's there, and it'll be happening, right? And this is again the Bredesen. There's 6 sites, and we're excited about it because like we want to see. There's other people doing work, right? This is Richard Isaacson. Richard was at Cornell for a long time. He stepped away from academia after a long time. He was at Harvard, he was at Cornell for a long time, and did like his major work there. He started was an Alzheimer's prevention clinic there. And it was after many, many years, I think he told me like a decade. We did a podcast interview with him after he published this. And I went to his office where I took that picture up in New York City. And like he was so excited to finally get his first publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Dementia, because it's published by the Alzheimer's Association, and they've been typically not open to the idea of prevention or risk reduction. And the more we think about this idea, I mean, it seems obvious to maybe you and I, certainly to me, that Alzheimer's should be probably thought of like cancer or heart disease, where it slowly starts, and therefore because it's similar to cancer or heart disease, in some respects, we should be able to prevent and do early intervention. It just seemed logical, but it was amazing to hear from Richard how much pushback there was this approach. It was amazing, right? So we've kind of talked a while, and everybody wants to know about, what do I do? What do I do? And I think there are certain things that apply to everybody: diet, sleep, how do we manage stress, and the way we exercise. And then there are things that are not necessarily for everybody. We mentioned hormones, we mentioned detoxification. There's certainly tons of supplements, right? And so this idea of personalized precision, right there, it requires someone that knows what they're doing, and I would argue a team of people that know what they're doing, and then to put it together in a way that works, that'll work, right? That gives it the best chance to work. And we work with people that kind of want to do everything themselves and don't take or are not really interested in this sort of team approach. They just want to work with a doctor, which is fine. And then there's people that are working in groups, and we have a lot of fun working with all of our people and all of our patients. But people that are that are in and they're invested in it and they're moving with it tend to do the best in general. So I mean, food can be super confusing, right? I just want to say that food can be quite confusing for everybody. And there's the ketogenic diet, there's the Mediterranean diet, there's the DASH diet, there's the MIND diet, there's the paleo, there's so many diets out there. And there's tons of problems with the evidence in terms of how these kinds of studies get out there. But I think Michael Pollan's food rules are the simplest. You've heard us say this probably several times. It's eating real food. Processed food's the number one thing here. I think I've yet to meet anybody who has lifted out of their diet processed food, so things that come out of bags and boxes, and has not had some kind of improvement. I'm sure there's probably one case of somebody that I'm not thinking of, but it is amazing how much it drives disease. And one of my soapbox things is as long as we have doctors telling patients you can't change your lifestyle, people won't change their lifestyle. People won't change their lifestyle as long as we spend pennies on the dollar or less than a penny on each dollar of healthcare on prevention and good evidence-based wellness. We'll probably just be saying, just wait until you need a pill or procedure, for all the reasons that all of us are familiar with. But then it becomes the work of us. It's really the people that are showing up on this call and clinics like ours and these kinds of partnerships to put some pressure on these large organizations to take this seriously and say, okay, what is this? Let's break this down. And that's what, it's part of our mission here at Kemper Cognitive Wellness is to be part of the discussion about changing the environment, especially as it comes to cognitive decline, right? Cognitive impairment, specifically Alzheimer's, but really all kinds of degenerative diseases. Plants and fiber is huge, not overeating, and eating timing is a big deal. I spoke about ketosis before. Ketosis definitely helps some people. And then it becomes important to measure micronutrients. I've seen some amazing cases just recently where people with these little targeted supplements are getting to mitochondrial issues, so energy in the cell, and they're raising energy in cells with targeted doses. I'm like 27 bottles, and they're taking these things 2 days a week, and these things 3 days a week. And it was helping. It was like it's amazing when people are committed how much improvement you can see, right? Other things that are trendy that can actually be helpful, especially because people respond to carbohydrates or different foods differently, is to know what your sugar is. And sometimes that can be just checking blood sugars. We have some people that are using continuous glucose monitors as the price comes down on those. Knowing their fasting sugar, knowing when to check, I had a person come up to us the other day. Oh my God, you've been telling me for years. And I finally got a continuous glucose monitor. I saw what my blood sugar did when I had a beer and it spiked. And not that it's going to completely change her life, but when you get that level of data and you get it over and over and you start to make the connection between what the choices I'm making in my life and then what's happening afterwards as a result, sometimes immediately and sometimes in aggregate because you've been kind of watching those things over months and years, that's when we see changes. But again, the group that's showing up here understands that needs a commitment, but that's really what it is. It's a commitment. It's not a 2 visits and we're done, 3 visits, we're done. It's a commitment to changing how we do things over time. And it's so foreign to most of us, if we're honest, because we won't go to the doctor. First I want insurance to pay for it. So if insurance not pay for it, it's probably not real medicine, right? That's the first barrier. And even if I think that this person can help me, why do they need me a team? What do I need? Why do I need to talk to a dietitian? What's the health coach? What is like it, because this stuff is complicated and we're figuring it out as with people as we go along, right? Like there's a certain amount that's known, and then part of our work is to get into the literature and to say, well, yes, this and not this. Yes, this. I just find that the world of alternative medicine, functional medicines, in many cases, is kind of this wild west. And there's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with, and we have conversations with many patients about, just what seems like too much. And on the other hand, if you go to like a big bucks place that does thankfully take insurance, we'll get none of this. And sometimes I hear doctors poo-pooing things that are clearly helpful. It's just they don't have a setup that would allow them to deliver this kind of care. So again, lots of stuff to do. Obviously, exercise is important. We'll just make mention of it. Our goal right now with people is to combine brain and body exercise at the same time. I think several people here participated in our brain boot camp. Obviously, for people here in Cleveland, there's the Brain Fit. We continue to try to. We're talking. Internally, how do we improve it? How do we make this better? Because there's other aspects to this. And it's not just about neurobics or cognitive and physical exercise together, right? It's got to be enough cardiovascular. It's got to be enough strength training. Talking about balance and coordination, right? And then there's a whole new sort of edge that we're going to talk about here in a second as it relates to the next big pillar, which is stress, right? I don't want to go on and scare everybody about stress. Like everybody in the last 3 or 4 years, and probably this group over the course of a lifetime, has had plenty of stress. Absolutely, it can be a trigger. I've seen it independently trigger or be a cofactor in triggering Alzheimer's, Lewy body dementia, and Parkinson's by itself. We've seen it. It's just on and on. We know for years, for decades, that it shrinks people's brains. It can make that word finding, that can I recall a name, language changes, all of these things have short-term memory, can decrease short-term memory. And there's periods in life where we were more susceptible to that. So what do we do about it, right? Okay, everybody knows exercise helps. It's amazing. It's amazing to see how food changes and sometimes nutritional supplementation can improve people's moods. I'm amazed because if you talk about stress, and people think about anxiety and sleep issues and fear, and that's just gone crazy the last 3 or 4 years since COVID. But what we're finding, to some degree, as a result of some of the stuff that's come up during COVID and through in terms of research, and then you start to put this together with other aspects of research, we start to talk about how do we rewire our nervous systems if they're deregulated, if they're over aroused and they're on hyper vigilant, hyper alert. How do we slow that down? Well, there are a lot of ways. Just most of the ways are not practical for people. Either they're working or they have a lot of responsibility. But the biggest thing we see is getting people together. And in our Brain Fit program, which is a local program where we're doing 2 hours collectively, we always knew it, and I've been wanting to do this Brain Fit about 2013, 2014, and we finally got it off the ground in 2021, and it's been running for over a year and a half now. And one of the great things about it is people do what's called co-regulation as a group. And if this is a new term for you, in order to settle down, to simmer down a deranged nervous system, and part of this is happening in an Alzheimer's state, or for people that have these sort of deranged, very anxious nervous systems that can drive the changes of brain breakdown that we see in Alzheimer's. So whether you're in it or you're trying to prevent it, it's something we have to deal with because it's a driver either way. So the simplest thing is being around people that get you, right? That seems supportive. Now, some people don't have that, or they're taking care of someone that has these issues. And so it's still important. It's like an Al-Anon versus AA. If your spouse is an alcoholic, Al-Anon might benefit you. If you are yourself an alcoholic, it might be AA. Right, so depending on the situation, obviously the need is different. But this idea of co-regulation it can be as simple as hugs, right? Hugs, like some doctors have 8 hugs a day, right? And it should be for more than 10 seconds, and it increases oxytocin. It sort of improves some of the mirror neuron function that can be that can lead to more anxiousness and fear, right? It can call it so it's like it's like exercise, but it's exercise into the nervous system through other sensory ways. So it's not exercise in the sense of like Jane Fonda exercise, but it's a way to train the nervous system similar to meditation, right? And so we started to call that other people, and us, we're starting to call this like a rewiring from the bottom up, right? And it has to do with bottom up means through the sensory organs. Two more examples that are probably already on your radar screen. So hearing problems and vision problems are both associated with accelerating the dementia process. So meaning if you have a hearing problem, you need to get it fixed. There's a vision problem, get it fixed, because otherwise it can make dementia, it may actually represent a risk for developing dementia. And for the same reason that it accelerates deterioration in somebody who already has brain problems, has cognitive impairment. And so the idea here is taking every pathway in to the brain. It doesn't always have to be a computer game. Yes, brain HQ or constant contact or constant therapy or lumosity maybe, or just general sort of this neurobics, straight cognitive exercises are important, but we can get to the brain through the rest of the nervous system. Because remember, the brain is in the body, right? So it can go with sensory and sound. It can be from, vestibular, sometimes it's vestibular training, vestibular rehab. People's balance improves, but also their memory and attention and their ability to get stuff done might improve as well. So these are things that are all these sort of multisensory combinations are things that we're learning more and more about as we're able to work with skilled therapists and trainers like we have on our team and others, outside. Sleep is a big one. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I think we all know the basics with sleep is it's like washing machine for your brain. If you're not getting enough, or the quality is not enough, or you're not sleeping right for your genetic timing, you're probably not getting things washed out as much as they need to be. And because of that, every single night that doesn't happen, plaques and abnormal things some proteins that build up in an Alzheimer's brain, even with one night, it can build up higher in the spinal fluid, right? So it has to do with how long am I sleeping, and is my sleeping quality good enough? The two biggest problems in the United States are typically apnea, sleep apnea, which is not enough oxygen, and someone's getting kicked out of that sleep cycle. And so that sleep cycle sometimes is like the washing machine needs to go long enough, and if you cut off the washing machine too early, it's not washed. The clothes aren't as clean as they could be. It's a similar but inexact analogy to sleep and sleep cycles in the brain. So insomnia and sleep apnea are the two biggest things that pull people out of that normal sleeping. We'll skip the supplements. And I think there's always like little new nuances, right? We have a new blood test for to pick up early changes that might be consistent with Alzheimer's. There's we're doing brain maps now for a few years, and those of us who've heard us talk about this before, there was a very big initiative across the world about 20 plus years ago at this point. We had the brain initiative, and the NIH tried to map the entire human brain, and they came up with this concept of the connectome. Right now, as opposed to the left side of the brain doing this, the right side of the brain doing this, the brain works more with the entire nervous system, the whole body, although that's not mapped just yet. We're mapping the actual brain and how the brain connects. And this has led to basically new understandings in neurology, new understandings in psychiatry, call it computational psychiatry, computational neurology. It's really, you're going to start, in about 5 or 10 years, you start to see really a changing, but you're seeing it in big academic pockets now, taking what's been understood from these big brain mapping projects, and now how do we help people with Alzheimer's or schizophrenia or depression, or with issues of mood and mind and memory, right? And it's pretty interesting. So what do I mean by a network, right? So just basically, this is a picture of a brain on an MRI, and the areas in red. Here you're seeing 3 different of the most common and well accepted networks. Not important exactly what they do for the moment. And they light up, right? When someone's doing certain things or they're thinking about certain things, certain areas will light up and other ones will not. And those areas that light up they're like committees, right? They decide things in total in connection with each other, right? So it's like a committee having to get together. You have more influential members, less influential members, but they have to come to some kinds of consensus. So the brain kind of works like that. One interesting thing is that it's not just, again, I'm encouraging us to stop thinking like, if I just do enough brain games, it'll help. One example of this is an area in the brain that's very important. The salience network helps us sort of filter out what might be important versus what might not be important. And in a certain condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so SIBO, right? There was a study that when they cleared the excess bacteria from the small intestines with a certain medication that doesn't get absorbed, and we use it fairly frequently, it actually improves connectivity in the insula. That's these red parts in the middle, top middle. It improves brain connectivity in the brain. That's from taking an antibiotic to remove something that's in excess in the gut. Right, so you hear about the gut-brain connection. Like, these are real things, right? These are real things. So each time we assault the gut with too much sugar, too much alcohol, whatever it is, right? And we say, oh, I didn't feel right. Like, nobody's going to be perfect, but all of these little things make a difference. If I can get 1%, 5%, 10%, 10%, all of a sudden I'm approaching 30% better with a bunch of little things as opposed to the one medicine that's going to make the whole difference, right? Okay, so how do we practically apply this network concept? Sometimes it's amazing, and sometimes it doesn't get us exactly where we want to get. Like, we don't get the information, but we use something called EEG brain mapping technology. It's been around for a long time, and some of the tools are getting more sophisticated, but the basic technology has been around for a long time. And so we get an electrical picture of the function of someone's brain. So this is different than an MRI or a CAT scan that tells us more like the structure, like a picture of what is. This is telling us more over time, like what's happening in the brain. Is there some slow feature? So this is a woman in her late 70s or mid-late 70s. Won't give you her exact age to just sort of protect the innocent here. And you see kind of a classic Alzheimer's picture. Like, there's a lot of slow activity on either side of the brain, and it kind of matched what her MRI said. And it's a woman that was homebound, and she didn't have anybody at home with her, and her family was in a position where they were able to get her some help at home. But she was super angry and cranky about it, and she wouldn't get dressed in the morning, and sometimes couldn't get dressed in the morning, wouldn't participate in any kind of rehab. We did this brain map, and we saw, okay, she's got the Alzheimer's change, but she also had PTSD and really, really profound anxiety, but she could not stop worrying. And she had traumas in her past that made it, a very good psychological story for why that would be. And particularly, you see this area in the middle, right? So this area in red in the middle is like the biggest highway, 10-lane highway going from the back of the brain to the front of the brain that was down, right? It was slowed. It was not efficient. And we worked on her with in-office and stimulation. She worked for about 3 or 4 weeks. We put her on a certain kind of a eating plan. We used one medication. She wouldn't take stuff. She was very disagreeable to a lot of other things. And in like a month, her cognitive scores changed more than I've seen sometimes in like 3 months or 6 months with people changing. She was agreeable, getting dressed. And, there was this whole idea that she was wanting to get joint replaced because she was not able to do a lot of things in her life because she needed a joint replaced, but she wasn't going to do the physical therapy afterwards, and it was pointless and just a risk to do the surgery. So her brain improved enough where she was, we had decided, okay, it's time for you to get that surgery, get the joint repaired, and have less pain. So it's like, it was an amazing, quick example. Of course, that's not everybody, but like, we have people that have been coming to us. I think the longest person coming to us for stimulation is like 4 years going. Sometimes we'll just do a battery. And I keep saying stimulation. What do I mean? Stimulation. So there are a variety of ways to modulate your brain, right? You can use in-office technology. There's wearable things. We can pass cranial stimulation with alternating or direct current. There are neurofeedback. Some of you might have heard neurofeedback. Neurofeedback's not delivering anything. It's more asking your brain to respond to screens and computers, and these are called brain-computer interfaces. And then there's more and more photobiomodulation. We have at least one, maybe a couple people that are using photobiomodulation devices. And sometimes we've seen, I mean, we've had a couple people that have said, wow, that really, really seemed to improve something. And then we've had a couple of people that say, I don't know, haven't really seen much. So I think it's going to depend. The technology has to evolve. The amount of power that we can introduce to someone's brain is going to evolve. I have some colleagues that are using, like, medical grade laser beams and put it in, shooting them into people's brains based on things like this, like the brain mapping technology, and where they're seeing networks down. And so we're learning at the edge here and trying to figure out what works for people, how it works, and then that the cost is what it is, but we really want to find things that work. And then the next question is, well, how long does it take to see an improvement, right? Well, certain things, like with dietary things that are based really just on cells and neuromechanisms, because I mean, some things happen in cells in less than a second. It's happening hundreds or thousands of times in a second. But to really see changes at these sort of higher order things, it's usually not days. It's occasionally weeks, but it's usually more like months, right? And so sometimes we just have to get, like, the snowball is coming down the mountain, we have to slow down and then start to push, right? That's where life often gets in the way, because this is it's a marathon, right? To some degree. In the meantime, though, if someone's really struggling in the near term, we need to do some if they're in dire straits, we need to make some more bold changes that are quick and that are more powerful. So, but it takes usually on order of weeks, months, and if we're honest, like years. It takes years for usually the changes to onset. And so if we're even with a diligent plan, if we get in early enough and sort of power it with enough force of intervention, we can see improvements in months, and sometimes it takes longer, but usually it's months is what we'll say, based on how the brain works. So I think in summary, just the ideal approach in managing things before they become dementia, I should have said before they become dementia, is like really being clear on why we're doing this and bringing in that just the life force, that what am I doing every day about this, and engaging with it, getting enough data, right? This multi-scale analysis, getting enough data. Deep phenotyping means just really getting a 360-degree as much as we can, as much as we can realistically, and then organizing a treatment plan that is ongoing. It's not, okay, start this medicine and it's an ongoing modifying treatment plan. Like you see people still don't get it after this. Most of us just don't get it. We want to go 2 visits, fix me so I can go back to McDonald's, you know what I mean? And getting drunk every night, that sort of thing. Like that's most of the time what people want. And probably you guys that are on this call are exceptions to this, but I think when many of us are honest, it's what we want, but it's not how it works. It's about growing and learning and engaging, and not fundamentally changing, but changing enough so that we can reroute our biochemistry and physiology into a different direction and avoid that decline that we all want to avoid, right? So obviously it's the earlier the better, because effective treatments are happening more early. That's what I got. Thank you for listening, guys. We can.
Nate, thank you so much. Lots and lots of great information coming through. Nate, are you able to pull up a slide? Do you have a little bit of information on the Evanthea study?
Oh, yeah.
If not, I could also share my screen.
Yeah, you want to share? Okay.
Sure. I said that, and I didn't hit refresh, but absolutely I can. Hang on. Nate, if you want to just share an overview while I pull up the site so we can get them the information.
Oh yeah, sure. So the basic idea is that we're taking people, I think it's like between 40, 45 and like 76, and that have immeasurable brain dysfunction, right? So it's not that just saying it, but we can measure that in some way. And then if we end up so then there's a bunch of criteria that, you know, if you have this, if you want, and then have to be willing to do all the things that we want to do in the study. It'll be an enormous amount of care. It's probably close to $75,000-$80,000 of stuff with all the, you know, all the bells and whistles they've built into the trial. And it'll go 9 months. There be our site will have 12 people. Each of these 6 sites will have 12 people. So we'll have 12 places, 12 people at our site. We can be, I think you have to be within 90 minutes of the clinic. You know, ideally 60, but we can take 90. And then there's the possibility that 4 of those 12 people would be randomized to a control group. So they wouldn't get anything for the 9 months. They wouldn't get the big intervention, but they would cross over after the 9 months and get like 3 to 6. They don't have to, but they do 3 to 6 months of care after the control period is over. So it's pretty exciting. I think we've been working on it for really a long time, and
Incredibly exciting.
It's a pretty cool thing.
I went ahead there. We are not currently accepting applications, but it will be coming soon in the coming weeks. If you can either grab that email address to the website, or I did type it in the chat if that's easier for you to grab, but you can go ahead and go to the website that we're not accepting applications. You can give your name, your email address so that you're being kept informed. I'm also going to go ahead. I know a few of you had a couple questions that we were going to maybe talk offline. I'm going to share my email address in the chat box as well. Happy to engage, talk a little bit more, and happy to have anyone out to the clinic who might be interested. Like we said, Nate, we hear you loud and clear. It's a lot of information, and it can be a lot of work, and it's a little overwhelming. This is literally what we do here at Kemper Cognitive Wellness. So we are happy to walk with you and give you some guidance.
Yes.
If there are any questions, I had a few off that were addressed offline, Nate, while you were talking. If anybody has anything, now would be the time to type it in the chat box. If not, we will let you go on with your day. But Nate, thank you so much for just a lot of really amazing information. And like you said yourself, I think probably a lot of people have heard some of this before, but it's so much to absorb. You just keep kind of taking in layers. And every time I think I hear you speak, I catch a little something different each time. Yeah.
I know there's somebody anonymous asks, is a keto diet recommended? We try to talk. I mean, I don't ketogenic diet. I think it's a good question, because that comes up all the time. Should I just go out and do the ketogenic diet? A ketogenic diet is a medical diet. It's not necessarily a healthy diet. It depends on the condition, right? It depends on the condition. So I don't just sort of blankly recommend a ketogenic diet. It really kind of depends on the individual and the condition that they're facing. But it can be really helpful. But if you're on medicines, diabetes, you know, like it can definitely make certain people worse. It can cause unnecessary, sometimes potentially harmful weight loss. It can cause cholesterols to go up. So it has to be managed right. But in the situation we're managing it right, it's really pretty. It can be a kind of a big piece for some people.
Nate, we had another question come in. Your answer may be similar to the keto diet, that it depends on the person, but it was kind of generally what supplements are typically that your body needs for good brain health, or is this very dependent upon the individual?
Yeah, I think it's the same. Like supplements are sort of like medicine, you know. I mean, you gotta have enough vitamin D, you gotta have enough B12, you have to have enough, you know, like you have enough magnesium, you have to have enough omegas, you have to and so we just measure those things. Some people don't need those things. So I think it's measuring the things that matter. I would start with those, those things: B12, vitamin D, magnesium, and omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil, and some people think about it as fish oil. And then, but it's not. There is no number of supplements that you could take that will fix the brain. Like there's it's not about that. And sometimes it's easier to do achieve the same goal with a $4 a month medication. And that's the other thing. I feel sometimes I meet people that are, I mean, I guess it's not right or wrong. It's just that the belief system is that, mainstream medicine or traditional medicine is, is somehow evil. And I don't really have that view. I feel like the system, I recognize that the system that we all are patients in, and I've worked in, some of you may have worked in as well, is definitely needs improvement, right? There's an element of brokenness about it, but there's some good things about it. Some medicines can be pretty useful. It's just everything has to be considered risk versus benefit. And my personality is much more as a consultant, and as opposed to kind of a finger wagging kind of a doctor, although we do have to do that sometimes. And like I had a person earlier today who was getting better. It's like frustrated that he's taking 7 or 8 supplements, but he's getting better from something that's not supposed to get better. So sometimes I don't know what, we can change ingredients, we can change items, but like if we're getting better and we're not really having a lot of side effects other than I feel a little queasy sometimes. So I have to step back and reassess sometimes our goals of care. So yeah, I think B12, vitamin D, omega-3s, magnesium are a good place to start.
Good places to start, but I hear you. There's no magic pill, right? That's
there are
the
some
tricky
magic pills,
part.
but I wouldn't give magic pills to everybody because
Right.
sometimes magic pills don't have a role, and it could potentially leave someone worse off.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. So one more thing. I see some questions popping up about costs and different assessments. It's really probably another day and another time. I know Nate has some appointments to get to. Please feel free to reach out to the clinic. We're happy to address questions, thoughts, learn a little bit more about you. That's the hard part as we're on here. We don't really know anything about you. And so sometimes to answer questions, it can be challenging until we meet you and see what might make some sense for you. So please reach out. You have my email address. You can always, of course, go to KemperCognitiveWellness.com. Most of you, I believe, are on our mailing list, so you're getting emails from us. Please reach out. Happy to try to help. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. If you're in Cleveland, enjoy the sunshine. Florida, I know Nate said a lot of you are from Florida. You probably already have it. But up here in Cleveland, we need it. So enjoy this day. Take care, everyone.